Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of the Mothership First Edition core set from Tuesday Night Games. Now, this is mainly written by Sean McCoy, but we will take a look at the credit for each of the books that are in this box set, just to make sure people get credit where credit is due. Should say, this box is just jam-packed with goodies because it's got the Player's Survival Guide, the Warden's Operation Manual, the Shipbreakers Toolkit, Unconfirmed Contact Reports, as well as the Adventure Another Bug Hunt, dice, standees, and more. Now, the box set with PDFs carries an MSRP of $59.99 over at Exalted Funeral. Should also mention you can get the PDF bundle at DriveThruRPG, but it's the same $59.99. So it's a no-brainer to get the physical box set for $59.99, well, of course, plus shipping, and get those PDFs absolutely free. Speaking of absolutely free, the Player's Survival Guide is pay what you want at DriveThruRPG in PDF. So, of course, if you want to check out Mothership First Edition, see how the game works, you can do so without actually having to fork over any cash. All right, all that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the core set for Mothership First Edition. Do want to mention, this is not a review copy. This did not come from Exalted Funeral. Well, okay, it came from Exalted Funeral, but I was able to get this because a longtime viewer really wanted me to review Mothership. So they actually sent me the funds to buy this core set from Exalted Funeral. So as I mentioned, this is not a review copy that's been provided by either Tuesday Night Games or Exalted Funeral. And the longtime viewer wants to remain anonymous. So I know who they are, they know who they are, but they don't want anyone else to know who they are. But a big thank you because I have really enjoyed diving on into Mothership. So once again, this is the core set. This is not the deluxe set, which actually has more stuff in the box, but there's plenty inside of this. So let's dive on in. First of all, let's talk about the extra goodies that are in this box. So we've got a couple of punch boards of standees and some stands. We have a dual-sided fold-out, which on one side has the breakdown of like range bands for contact in space. So starships, things like that. And then we also have the layout of an example ship. So this is the Contessa class. So we get the deck plan, travel costs. We get the stat block here. Pretty cool. Now in the Shipbreakers Toolkit, we will have rules on how to build your own starships, plus a slew of various different pre-designed starships and their stat blocks. We also get a very sturdy Warden screen because that's the name of the game master in Mothership. They are the Warden. And anything you need to run this game is right here. In fact, there's far more than what you need on this Warden screen. Really like that a lot. We get a set of dice. So Mothership uses percentile dice, 10-sided dice, and a 20-sided die. So that's it as far as what dice you need. You might want to have some multiple sets of 10-sided dice, percentile dice as the example here because we've got the tens die. Because there is advantage and disadvantage where you would be rolling more than one set of percentile dice. I'll get into that when we talk about the actual rules of the game. Now, I've already put together a relatively in-depth unboxing video that I've shared. So I am not going to take a look at tons of pages in these books. If you want a far closer look at any of the 5 books that we're going to be peeking at here, by all means, check out that first look video. So I want to point out how you play Mothership is right here on the back of this book. That is it. All you really need to know to get started is right here. Now, of course, there's far more to this than just that. But in essence, that's really the core. So you're going to start off, you're going to create a character. And if you're not familiar with Mothership, it is a science fiction horror role-playing game. Although I will mention that you could easily use the core mechanics for Mothership and a lot of the content from this core set to just play regular science fiction role-playing games. Maybe games that were going to skew more along the lines of, say, The Expanse or films like Outland, as opposed to like Star Wars and Star Trek. So along the lines of science fiction of the not too distant future, as opposed to a galaxy far, far away or thousands of years in the future. So you're going to roll up your character, and essentially what you do, you've got 4 stats. You've got strength, speed, intellect, and combat. So combat is an attribute. You're going to roll 2 10-sided dice, and you're going to add that to 25. That is going to be your core attribute score. Now, this is a percentile-based role-playing game, so what you're looking at is you're rolling equal to or less than your attributes or your skills, which are built off of your attributes, in order to succeed. Should mention that the stat scores are low. The skill scores are fairly low, even for experienced characters. And I know that is an issue with some people who don't realize how you play Mothership and as a warden, how you run Mothership. If a player fails their role, it does not necessarily mean that they fail what they were attempting to do. It's just that things have become more complicated. Maybe there's something else that now they have to take care of. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's strictly pass-fail as far as rolling your attributes and your skills. We also have saves, and those saves are sanity, fear, and body. And we have stress. So we have a panic die. That's what the 20-sided die is. And anytime you have to make a panic roll, you're rolling a 20-sided die, and this time you're looking to roll high because you gain stress. So you're looking to roll higher than your current stress in order to pass that. Now, interestingly enough, if the player character fails, it does not necessarily mean something bad is going to happen. You're going to roll on the panic table, and there are some times that they tend to be more focused because of the stress. Good things happen. Now, that's more rare than bad things happening. But still, I like the fact that if you fail your panic roll, it's not always doom and gloom. The actual character creation is probably going to take you maybe 10 minutes at most, which I really like. Now, this is not an OSR role-playing game. This is what people would usually refer to as a new SR game. So this is not part of the old school Renaissance or revival or whatever you want that R to stand for, but it certainly does have an old school Renaissance mindset. You'll see there are a lot of random tables. There are a lot of aspects to emergent play, and the rules are very concise. You're not getting a lot of extra fluff as far as the content of these books. And I really like that. So as far as combat goes, you would be rolling your combat skill. If you succeed, you're going to roll your damage. And player characters in Mothership First Edition, as well as NPCs who are human, are squishy. You will see that Mothership has a high lethality to combat. So once again, it's that kind of OSR mindset, avoid combat whenever possible. Not only do these weapons cause a lot of damage, but you also take wounds. You're going to have a damage rating, and when you take so many points of damage, you take a wound. And when you take a wound, you're going to roll on this table here with a 10-sided die, and depending on, the type of damage. And right now, I'll tell you, on a roll of a 10, that's it. You're done. You have bought the farm. Doesn't matter what kind of damage it is. So you do not want to be engaging in firefight after firefight, even if you are a Marine character. So there are 4 types of characters in the game. We have got the Marines, which focus on combat, but if they fail their panic, they're big trouble. We also have androids. Androids can do things that humans can't. They can survive in the vacuum of space, as an example. We also have scientists who come in all shapes and sizes and stripes. And then we have teamsters. If you're familiar with the film Alien, the crew would be considered to be teamsters. We also have skills. So depending on what your class is, you will have trained skills, expert skills, and master skills. And essentially you're adding 10, 15, and 20 to the applicable attribute for those skills. So pretty easy there. Now, the skills, there are a good number of skills, but they are rather broad. So you're not looking at really drilling down with certain things. But we have the trained skills, which tend to be broader than the expert skills. And then the master skills tend to drill down a little bit more specified than, say, trained or expert skills. And that is, in essence, the rules to Mothership. Now, I like this survival guide quite a bit. As I pointed out, some people have this misunderstanding. Playing Mothership would be a real downer because you're going to fail so much more often than you're going to succeed. But that's not necessarily the case. As I pointed out, failing on a die roll does not necessarily mean that the player character failed what they're trying to attempt. Things have just become more complicated, which I think is very cool. I will also point out, in my opinion, I think Mothership is aimed at game masters who have some experience under their belt because of that success failure where it's not necessarily cut and dried. We also have the Warden's Operation Manual, which, in my opinion, this is the book that stands out from this set. I could say it's worth the price of admission, but I mean, it's zine-sized. I don't think you'd be paying $60 for this, but I love what's in this because it's going to walk through for the game master. How do you really run Mothership? And it gets into how to get ready for your first session, going through various different acts, creating interesting NPCs, how to create a map, how to draw up your map, how to teach the game. This really takes 10 minutes at most to learn how to play. And that's if the Warden is going to get into the details with the players of how combat works and things like that. We're going to break down exactly how does this game work, player agency, making decisions, social encounters. I mean, there is so much in the Warden's Operation Manual that applies to any sort of role-playing game. Really, really like this quite a lot. And it is just jam-packed with goodness. I mean, if I were rating the books on a scale of 0 to 10 separately, this is a 10 out of 10. It is certainly really an excellent read, too, for a game master. I mentioned we were going to look at the credit pages. So let's make sure we do that. So here's a credit page for the Warden's Operation Manual. It is written by Sean McCoy. We've got quite a few different artists involved. Same thing with the Player's Survival Guide. It's also written by Sean McCoy. Now, when we get into the bestiary, that has a variety of different authors. Then we get into the Shipbreakers Toolkit, which is going to give you the rules that you need to create ships, different kinds of ships. So we have a variety of different stat blocks. Boy, doesn't that have an Aliens vibe to it right there with a dropship and the APC? So we get all different kinds of ships. And as you can see, the design style is very much in the way of the Alien universe. Even 2001, 2010, all that, the Expanse. So we're going to get into all the various different rules as far as shipboard life and combat. And we get an example of play as far as the various different checks that come into play. Really cool book. I really like this quite a bit. And this is where you start expanding from just a science fiction horror role-playing game. These are the rules where you can start taking maybe a rules light traveler approach to your role-playing campaign by using Mothership First Edition. So very nicely done. Unconfirmed Contact Reports is the bestiary. This is probably my least favorite of the books, and it's because of the art. I am not a fan of the art punk movement. Now, thankfully, unlike many art punk books out there, there is gameable content in here, which is super important. Because one of the knocks I have with a lot of like Merkberg, or as I like to always say, Merkberg releases that are from third parties, is it tends to be more just about the artwork as opposed to the material for gaming. Thankfully, that is not the case here. This, we have quite a few different authors. So each of these entries looks as if they have a different author. So we get to break down how to use the book. I love the fact that your stat block is right here. Pretty easy to access your stat block. And each of these entries, off the top of my head, I think there's 40 of them, maybe a little more than 40, are pretty interesting. Some are kind of gonzo and rather bizarre. But all in all, this is pretty solid. Like I said, artwork's kind of a mixed bag. I will say throughout the various different books for Mothership, the artwork is relatively uniform because outside of this, as well as the color book, which is another bug hunt, the artwork's all black and white line art. But yeah, I mean, something like that, I mean, that doesn't do anything for me. My apologies to the artist, but it's just not my style. I know a lot of people out there love art punk role-playing games. That's fine. It's just not my bag of tricks. But all throughout, pretty solid entries. There's some pretty cool creatures in here. As I also mentioned, there's some oddball gonzo ones. But for the most part, pretty nice. Then we wrap up with the adventure. And even though this is a zine-sized book, you are going to get a lot of gameplay from this adventure. There is a lot going on. This, I would say, it breaks up into like a dozen scenarios. And while the scenarios don't take up a ton of page space, you should be able to get a decent length session of play pretty much out of each of these adventures. I am not going to get into any spoilers with this, but I will say that this is a relatively epic campaign that your characters are going to engage in. And do not be surprised if quite a few players end up meeting their makers in this. It's not I wouldn't say this is a meat grinder, but as I had already pointed out, Mothership First Edition player characters are squishy. Regardless of how experienced they are, they're pretty squishy. So I like this adventure all in all. I think it's really solid. And this is also available separately. All of these books are available separately or as PDFs too. So we've got another bug hunt, Unconfirmed Contact Reports, the Shipbreakers Toolkit, the Warden's Operation Manual, and the Player's Survival Guide, plus all those other goodies, all packed inside the Mothership core set. So let's swing on over to the other camera. I'm going to provide some final thoughts and give the core set a review score. I really like Mothership First Edition, and a big thank you to the longtime viewer who provided the funds for me to pick this up, because I really enjoyed reading through it. And as I like to always point out when I'm sharing reviews for a core rule system for a role-playing game, one of the biggest aspects that really ends up coloring my review score is, would I run this game with my group? And I can certainly say affirmative to Mothership First Edition. I really like it a ton. I will say it's important, once again, I know I'm going to harp on this, but it's important to understand that rolling and failing at a task does not necessarily mean the player character has failed. If you approach the game with that mindset as the warden, your players are not going to have a good time, because they're going to find that they're just constantly failing at whatever they attempt to achieve. But it really does help ratchet up the tension when they fail with their role, and you know, as the warden, let them know that yes, they succeeded, or it's one of those, well, you succeed, but situations. A lot of times, players who are experienced with Mothership, when they roll and they fail and they still succeed, they know in the back of their mind something bad is probably on the horizon because of it. But like I said, it's very important as the game master to understand it is not simply succeed or fail, because if you run the game that way, it's going to be a drag for your players. As far as what's packed into this core set, you're getting tons of value for that $59.99. As I also mentioned previously, the Warden's Operation Manual is excellent. There are some really cool tips in there that game masters running any sort of role-playing game should take a peek at. Really, really informative. And I love how the Operations Manual really does break down, how do you run the game? What are ways to create adventures? How do you create interesting NPCs? How do you ratchet up the pressure on the players? All that stuff really nicely done. The rest of the books, pretty cool too. Like I said, the least favorite out of the bunch is the bestiary, the Unconfirmed Contact Reports, but it's still fine. So all in all, this is really cool. I really enjoyed reading through Mothership First Edition. I would certainly run this with my group. So on a score of 0 to 10, I give Mothership First Edition's core set a 9 out of 10. I think it is that good. If you have any interest in a science fiction horror role-playing game, or even a rules light near future science fiction role-playing game, then Mothership First Edition should really be on your radar. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, streams right here on YouTube Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.